It was a peaceful weekend, one of those rare occasions when I found myself alone at home. My family had gone out for a trip, leaving me to enjoy the tranquility of our house, a place that had stood for over 50 years. The age of the house brought with it a familiar symphony of creaking floorboards and the occasional groan from the old plumbing system. These were sounds that might unsettle a first-time visitor, but to me, they were as ordinary as the ticking of a clock. The evening began as many others had, with me settling into the cozy embrace of our living room couch. I had decided to indulge in a Netflix binge, choosing a light-hearted animation, Final Space, if I recall correctly. The flickering light from the television screen cast playful shadows across the room, and the gentle hum of the dialogue started to lull me into a state of relaxation. The silence that enveloped the house was a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of voices and activities that filled our home. As I lay there, the quietness of the empty house became more pronounced. It wasn't an unsettling silence, but rather a serene, almost meditative stillness. Without the constant interruptions from my boisterous family, I could hear every little noise the house made. The wooden beams expanding and contracting with the change in temperature, the soft rustle of leaves against the windows, and the distant hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. All these sounds blended into a peaceful background score. I was nearly drifting off, my eyelids growing heavy with the comfort of the moment, when the tranquility was abruptly shattered. A sudden, loud thump echoed from the room above mine, jolting me awake. My house has 3 floors, with the bedrooms located on the second floor, connected by a short corridor. Just beside my bedroom door is an old spiral staircase made of wood, leading up to the attic, a space we mostly use for storage, filled with forgotten items and dusty furniture. The noise had come from the attic. It was loud enough to break through the barrier of my sleepy haze and demand my full attention. For a moment, I lay there, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling, but the sound had been too deliberate, too heavy. As the echo of the thump faded into the silence, a sense of unease began to creep in. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up, and my heartbeat quickened. This was not one of the usual sounds I had grown accustomed to over the years. I sat up, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just heard. The serenity of the evening was replaced by a growing apprehension, a sense that something was not quite right. In the stillness of the house, the sound had been startlingly clear, impossible to ignore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and listened intently, straining to hear any follow-up noises that might provide a clue to what had caused the disturbance. As I sat up on the couch, the unsettling sound echoed in my mind, refusing to be dismissed as a figment of my imagination. The thud had been so abrupt, so out of place in the otherwise peaceful night. I tried to focus on the animation playing on Netflix, but my concentration was shattered. The sound seemed to linger in the air, demanding my attention and pulling my thoughts away from the screen. My house is a 3-story structure with the bedrooms located on the second floor. Each room is connected by a short, narrow corridor, and just beside the door to my bedroom is an old spiral staircase. This staircase, made of creaky wood, leads up to the attic. The attic, a dusty and cluttered space, was a repository for all sorts of forgotten items, old furniture, broken computer parts, childhood toys, and boxes filled with memories we no longer had space for in our daily lives. It was a place we rarely visited, especially since it had become a sort of dumping ground for anything we didn't have immediate use for. The sound had come from the attic, of that I was certain. It had been too distinct to come from anywhere else. I paused the show, the silence of the house now even more pronounced without the background noise from the TV. The room fell into a deep quiet, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I strained my ears, listening intently for any further disturbances. Then it happened again, a loud, deliberate thud. This time, there was no mistaking it. The sound reverberated through the house, louder and clearer than before. My heart skipped a beat and a cold shiver ran down my spine. It sounded like something heavy had been dropped onto the wooden floor of the attic. But what could it be? We hadn't been up there in weeks, and nothing up there should be capable of making such a noise on its own. Must immediately thought of my cat, Meow. He had a knack for getting into places he shouldn't and scaring the life out of me with his antics. But as I glanced around the room, I saw him curled up on the desk, fast asleep. His peaceful slumber ruled him out as the culprit. My mind raced through other possibilities. Could it be the wind? An animal? Or, as much as I hated to admit it, could it be something more sinister? The thought of an intruder crossed my mind, but it seemed unlikely. The house was locked up tight, and there were no signs of forced entry. Besides, I would have heard the characteristic creak of the old wooden steps if anyone had come up or down the stairs. No, this was something different, something already inside the house. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising tide of anxiety. I needed to investigate, to find out what was causing these noises. But the idea of venturing into the attic in the dead of night was far from appealing. Gathering my courage, I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I moved quietly towards the door, my footsteps barely making a sound on the thick carpet. Reaching the door, I hesitated for a moment. The house seemed to hold its breath with me, the silence now almost oppressive. I turned the lock, feeling a small measure of relief as the mechanism clicked into place. At least, I had a barrier between me and whatever was making those noises. I pressed my ear against the wooden door, listening for any hint of movement. The house remained silent, as if waiting for me to make the next move. As I stood there, my ear pressed against the wooden door, the silence enveloped me, amplifying my sense of unease. I strained to hear any indication of movement from the attic above. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what could be causing the disturbance. The idea of something sinister lurking in the attic seemed absurd, but the inexplicable nature of the sound gnawed at my nerves. I took a deep breath and stepped away from the door, turning my attention to the room around me. The shadows cast by the dim light from the TV seemed to dance eerily on the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes fell on Meow, my faithful cat, who was still curled up in his usual spot on the desk. His peaceful demeanor provided a momentary comfort, reminding me that I wasn't entirely alone. I began to methodically go through potential explanations. Maybe a draft had knocked something over, but that didn't quite fit. The attic was packed with heavy items that wouldn't be easily disturbed. The notion of an animal crossing my mind again. It wasn't uncommon for small critters to find their way into old houses like mine. Yet, the weight and rhythm of the thuds suggested something far larger than a mouse or even a raccoon. Ruling out the natural explanations, I couldn't ignore the possibility of an intruder. The thought was unsettling, to say the least. My house was secure. I had personally checked the locks and windows before settling down for the evening. No signs of forced entry had been apparent, and I knew the distinctive creak of the old staircase would have alerted me to someone coming up. The possibility of someone hiding in the attic seemed slim, but not impossible. I shuddered at the thought. Despite my mounting fear, curiosity and a sense of duty pushed me to investigate further. I reached for my phone, the screen glowing brightly in the dim room. The time read 11:47. Late enough that the neighborhood was wrapped in a blanket of quiet, adding to the eerie atmosphere inside the house. I debated calling someone, family, a friend, or even the police, but dismissed the idea. I didn't want to alarm anyone without concrete evidence of a threat. Resolute, I approached the foot of the spiral staircase. The steps, old and worn, held a history of countless footsteps, but tonight they seemed to take on a more ominous character. The first step creaked loudly under my weight, the sound echoing up the narrow passageway. I paused, waiting for any reaction from above. The silence persisted, heavy and foreboding. Slowly, I ascended the stairs, each step deliberate and cautious. My hand slid along the smooth wooden railing, a slight comfort in the otherwise tense moment. The closer I got to the attic, the louder my heartbeat seemed to pound in my ears. When I reached the top, I found myself facing the attic door, a barrier between me and the source of the unsettling noises. I stood there, taking a moment to steady my breathing. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through the crack. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a low groan. The attic lay before me, a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten relics. Boxes and old furniture were piled haphazardly, creating an almost maze-like environment. Peering into the gloom, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of disturbance, no movement. The quiet was palpable, as if the very air was holding its breath. I took a tentative step inside, my footfall muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. Another step, and then another, each one taking me deeper into the attic. As I moved further in, the oppressive silence was suddenly broken by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, clear, deliberate, and impossibly close. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at once, surrounding me in an echoing cacophony. Panic surged through me, my rational mind struggling to keep control. Something was up here with me, and it was making its presence known in the most terrifying way possible. I stood frozen in the attic, the sound of footsteps reverberating through the space, sending chills down my spine. The noise was unmistakable, heavy, deliberate, and far too real to be a figment of my imagination. My eyes darted around the dimly lit attic, searching for any sign of movement. Shadows danced across the cluttered room, cast by the faint moonlight filtering through the small, dusty window. Every box and piece of furniture seemed to loom ominously, creating an almost labyrinthine feel to the space. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the rhythm of the footsteps. They moved with a purpose, crossing the floor from one end of the attic to the other. I strained to pinpoint their origin, but the sound seemed to bounce off the walls, making it difficult to locate. It was as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth, restless and agitated. I took a tentative step forward, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The footsteps paused for a moment, as if aware of my presence, before resuming with renewed vigor. They moved faster now, the thudding sound growing louder and more insistent. I counted the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, each one amplifying my growing sense of dread. They moved from left to right, heading towards the staircase. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. If it was an intruder, why had they made themselves known? Why were they moving in such a methodical, almost ritualistic manner? The logical part of my brain struggled to find an explanation, but the primal fear gripping me made it hard to think clearly. All I knew was that I needed to act, and quickly. I reached for the light switch, hoping to dispel some of the shadows and perhaps catch a glimpse of whatever was making the noise. The old flickering bulb illuminated the attic with a dim yellowish glow, casting eerie shadows across the room. Despite the added light, there was no sign of movement, no figure lurking in the corners. The footsteps continued, relentless and unyielding. Desperation set in as I realized that I was truly alone up here, with no clear understanding of what was happening. I moved towards the source of the noise, my footsteps barely audible over the sound of the mysterious intruder. The closer I got, the more the fear tightened its grip on me. The air felt thick and heavy, almost suffocating as I navigated the cluttered space. As I reached the center of the attic, the footsteps suddenly stopped. The abrupt silence was deafening, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the next move. My eyes scanned the room frantically, searching for any sign of life. The only sound was the rapid beating of my heart, pounding in my ears. Then, as if on cue, the footsteps resumed, this time moving towards the spiral staircase. The creaking of the old wooden steps echoed through the attic, each step sounding heavier and more deliberate than the last. It was clear that whatever was making the noise was descending the stairs, heading straight towards the second floor. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't alone in the house, and whatever was here with me was making its way downstairs. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of the house and call for help. But my body refused to move, paralyzed by a fear so intense, it felt like I was rooted to the spot. I could hear the footsteps descending, each one closer than the last. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and for a brief moment, there was silence. I held my breath, waiting for the next sound, the next clue to what was happening. And then, with a final resounding thud, the footsteps stopped. The house fell into an eerie silence once more, leaving me standing alone in the attic, my mind racing with questions and fears. What had just happened? Who, or what, was in my house? And why had it stopped so suddenly? The answers eluded me, hidden in the shadows of that old creaky attic. The silence that followed the footsteps was almost more unnerving than the noise itself. My mind was a whirl of fear and confusion. Yet amidst the chaos, a resolve began to form. I needed to know what was causing these disturbances. Ignoring it or running away wouldn't provide the answers I needed, and my curiosity, mixed with a sense of responsibility, drove me to act. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The attic, now partially illuminated by the flickering bulb, looked less sinister, but no less mysterious. I needed a plan, a way to approach this without endangering myself. My first instinct was to arm myself with something, anything, that could offer a sense of security. I scanned the attic for a suitable object and settled on a sturdy old walking stick leaning against a stack of boxes. It wasn't much, but it gave me a semblance of confidence. I moved cautiously towards the attic door, every step calculated to avoid making any unnecessary noise. The old floorboards creaked under my weight, and I winced at each sound, hyper-aware of the quiet that enveloped the house. As I reached the door, I paused, listening intently for any signs of movement from below. The silence was almost tangible, pressing down on me like a weight. Slowly, I descended the spiral staircase, the walking stick held firmly in my grip. Each step seemed to amplify my anxiety, the creak of the wood, a constant reminder of the age and fragility of the house. The staircase, once a mundane part of my home, now felt like a descent into the unknown. I half expected to see something, anything, lurking in the shadows. But the way down remained eerily empty. When I reached the second floor, I paused again, taking stock of my surroundings. The hallway stretched out before me, a narrow passage lined with doors leading to the various bedrooms. The door to my own room was still closed, exactly as I had left it. I walked over and tried the handle, ensuring it was locked. Satisfied, I turned my attention to the rest of the house. The logical part of my mind told me to call for help. My phone was still in my pocket, and a quick call to the police would bring assistance. But another part of me, driven by curiosity and a need for answers, pushed me to investigate further. I needed to know what was happening in my own home. I started with the obvious places, checking each room methodically. The guest bedroom, the bathroom, my parents' room, all were empty, just as they should be. Each door creaked as I opened and closed it, the sound echoing in the quiet house. I moved through the hallway with a growing sense of urgency, each unchecked room a potential source of the disturbance. As I neared the end of the hallway, I realized there was only one place left to check: the living room and the adjoining kitchen. These were the only areas I hadn't yet inspected, and if there was something or someone in a bus and dedikada yeda sundo sa mama house, they had to be there. I took another deep breath, steeling myself for whatever I might find. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the TV screen, still paused on the Netflix show I'd been watching. The familiar scene provided a momentary sense of normalcy, but the unease quickly returned as I scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of disturbance or intrusion. I moved cautiously towards the kitchen, my steps light and deliberate. The kitchen, too, was empty. The counters were clean, the appliances quiet. Everything was as it should be. I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that there was no immediate threat, but frustration at the lack of answers. What had caused the footsteps? Where had they gone? As I stood there, pondering my next move, a soft sound broke the silence. A faint, almost imperceptible creak coming from the staircase. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the noise was coming from the attic stairs. I turned slowly, my grip tightening on the walking stick, and made my way back towards the spiral staircase. The steps seemed to beckon me, inviting me to uncover the truth hidden in the shadows above. As I approached the base of the spiral staircase, the faint creak I had heard earlier replayed in my mind, heightening my sense of dread. The attic loomed above me, a shadowy realm filled with unknown dangers. Every instinct told me to turn back, to flee to the safety of the outside world, but I couldn't. Something compelled me to continue, to face whatever was making those noises. I took the first step up the staircase, the wood groaning under my weight. The sound seemed louder than before, echoing through the silent house. My grip tightened on the walking stick, the rough texture grounding me in the moment. With each step, the air grew colder, as if the attic itself was exuding a chill that seeped into my bones. The halfway point of the stairs felt like a no-man's land, caught between the relative safety of the second floor and the unknown terror of the attic. I paused, listening intently for any further sounds. The house remained eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, amplifying every creak and whisper. My heartbeat was a drum in my ears, each beat a reminder of my growing fear. I continued upwards, each step a battle against my mounting anxiety. The closer I got to the attic, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as if the very walls were closing in, the shadows deepening with every passing second. When I finally reached the top, I found myself standing in front of the attic door once more, its dark wood a barrier between me and the source of my fear. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. The attic lay before me, unchanged from my earlier inspection. The dim light from the bulb cast long shadows across the cluttered space, each one a potential hiding place for whatever was making those footsteps. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath me, and began to survey the room. The boxes and old furniture were as I had left them, undisturbed and covered in a fine layer of dust. I moved cautiously, my eyes scanning every corner for any sign of movement. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional groan of the house settling. I reached the center of the room, the place where I had first heard the footsteps, and paused. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow moving in the far corner of the attic. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to face it, my body tensing in anticipation. The shadow seemed to shift and waver, as if it were alive. But as I took a step closer, it became clear that it was just a trick of the light, a pile of boxes casting an unusual shape on the wall. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My relief short-lived as the footsteps resumed. Louder and more insistent than before, they moved quickly, crossing the attic with purpose, heading towards the staircase. The sound was unmistakable, heavy, deliberate, and utterly terrifying. I turned to follow the noise, my eyes wide with fear. As I reached the staircase, I saw the steps move, each one groaning under an invisible weight. The footsteps descended rapidly, one after another, as if something was fleeing the attic. The old wood creaked and shuddered with the force, the noise echoing through the house. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the last of the footsteps disappear down the stairs. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just witnessed. The rational part of me screamed that it was impossible, that there had to be a logical explanation, but the evidence was irrefutable. Something had been up here with me, and it had just made its way downstairs. Summoning my courage, I descended the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. The house was silent once more, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as I reached the second floor. I paused at the bottom of the staircase, listening for any sign of movement below. The footsteps had stopped, but the fear remained, a constant companion in the dark. I moved cautiously through the hallway, my senses heightened. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind outside seemed amplified, adding to my growing paranoia. I reached the living room, the familiar scene of the paused Netflix show, a stark contrast to the terror I felt. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. Then, with a suddenness that made me jump, the footsteps resumed. They were slower now, more deliberate, as if whatever was making them was searching for something. They moved through the house, passing through the living room and into the kitchen. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, the walking stick clutched tightly in my hand. I reached the kitchen just as the footsteps stopped, the silence once again descending like a heavy blanket. I stood there, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The air was thick with tension, the fear almost palpable. And then, in the quiet of the night, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the darkness. The soft whisper sent a chill down my spine, and my grip on the walking stick tightened instinctively. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, the shadows around me seeming to close in, amplifying my sense of isolation. The whispering continued, a faint, almost ethereal sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was unintelligible, a murmur of words just beyond the edge of comprehension, but the tone was unmistakably ominous. I took a hesitant step into the kitchen, my eyes scanning every corner for the source of the sound. The dim light from the living room cast long shadows that danced eerily on the walls. The kitchen, usually a place of comfort and warmth, now felt alien and threatening. Every object seemed to hold a sinister presence, from the glinting knives on the counter to the dark recesses of the cupboards. The whispering grew louder as I moved further into the room, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder of my fear. I reached the center of the kitchen and paused, trying to pinpoint the source of the whispering. It seemed to be coming from the far corner, near the pantry door. Summoning every ounce of courage, I edged closer, my steps slow and deliberate. As I approached the pantry, the whispering suddenly stopped, plunging the room into an eerie silence. I hesitated, my breath caught in my throat, and reached for the pantry door. My hand trembled as I grasped the handle, the cold metal sending a shiver up my arm. With a deep breath, I yanked the door open, expecting to find something. But the pantry was empty, its shelves filled with canned goods and dry foods, undisturbed and ordinary. Confusion mingled with my fear, and I took a step back, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when I heard it. A distinct, guttural growl, emanating from directly behind me. My blood ran cold, and I spun around, the walking stick raised defensively. There, in the shadowy corner of the kitchen, was a figure. It was indistinct, almost like a silhouette cut out of the darkness itself. But the eyes glowed with a malevolent light. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, stepping out of the shadows with an eerie grace. It was tall, its form vaguely humanoid, but distorted, as if reality itself was bending around it. The growl came again, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air. I felt paralyzed, my limbs refusing to obey, my desperate urge to flee. The figure continued to advance, each step slow and measured, as if savoring the fear that radiated from me. In a desperate bid for survival, I swung the walking stick at the figure. The stick passed through it with no resistance, as if striking a shadow. The figure didn't flinch, didn't react, but its eyes flared with a brighter intensity. It reached out a hand, long and skeletal, and I felt an icy chill grip my heart. My breath caught in my throat, and I staggered back, the walking stick slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The figure stopped, its hand still outstretched, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The kitchen was filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I could see my reflection in those glowing eyes, a terrified figure caught in a nightmare. The figure's mouth opened and the whispering resumed, louder and more urgent, the words still incomprehensible, but filled with a sense of urgency and malevolence. With a surge of adrenaline, I stumbled back, my foot catching on the edge of the counter. I fell, landing hard on the floor, the breath knocked out of me. The figure loomed over me, its presence a dark shadow that seemed to blot out all light. The whispering reached a crescendo, a cacophony of voices that filled my mind and drowned out all coherent thought. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable, my mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whispering stopped. The oppressive weight lifted, and I dared to open my eyes. The figure was gone. The kitchen once again filled with the dim, comforting light of the living room. I lay there for a moment, my body trembling with residual fear, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The air felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere dissipating as if a storm had passed. I slowly got to my feet, my body aching from the fall, and looked around the kitchen. Everything was as it had been, the shadows receding, the normalcy of the room returning. But I knew that what I had experienced was real. The figure, the whispers, the malevolent presence. It had all been real. I picked up the walking stick, my only remaining sense of security, and moved cautiously back towards the living room. The house was silent once more, the kind of silence that feels almost too quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath. I needed answers, but more importantly, I needed to ensure my safety. I reached for my phone, my hand still shaking, and dialed the number for the police. As I waited for the call to connect, I glanced back at the kitchen, half expecting to see the figure return. The shadows seemed to watch me, a silent reminder of the terror that lurked within my own home.